Ask them, hey, of the people around you, of the data scientists around you, who are the most effective? What do they do? And it essentially boils down to this question. What are the skill sets needed to be an effective data scientist?
Today, I had the pleasure of interviewing Eugene Yan. Eugene works at the intersection of machine learning and product to build pragmatic, customer-facing ML systems. He also writes and speaks about effective data science, data and ML systems, and career growth. Currently, he's an applied scientist at Amazon, shipping machine learning and recommender systems to help customers read more. On his website, he shares what he's learned on shipping ML systems with a pragmatic and product slant. He's written over 119 posts and over 215,000 words in total so far. In this episode, we learn about how Eugene broke into the data science field from a psychology background. We also go through the challenges of breaking into the US job market. I learned quite a bit about how the visa process works and how different countries have different visa quotas. Finally, we touch on the importance of end-to-end data science and how sharing your work can help you to make your own luck. I had a great experience getting to know Eugene better through this interview, and I hope you learn a lot from this episode. Eugene, thank you so much for coming on the Ken's Nearest Neighbors podcast here. I really like your story. I think that your experience transitioning into data science, finding your first job, and moving it to multiple countries to do analytic work is going to be something a lot of people can learn from. And I think that just hearing from your voice and talking about your passion for the field is really exciting. So thank you for coming on.
And thank you for having me here, Ken. Looking forward to a great chat.
Excellent. I am as well. And so the way I usually like to open up, rather than being like, yeah, tell me about yourself, I prefer to ask where you first got interested in data. Was it an aha moment, or was it this slow progression into learning more and then realizing, hey, this is the type of work I do now?
Yeah, I think it started with me being interested in people. I was always interested in people, how they think, how they perceive, how they behave. And that started with my degree in psychology, right? So I was in college, I was studying psychology, how do people think? I was specifically interested in how people respond to competition. So that some people don't respond well to competition and the bell curve in school, but some people are just so driven by it. So I did that. And then after that, that was the point in time I had to start programming. I had to program in R and also use a lot of SPSS. So data really helped me to understand people, codify people, and operationalize their behavior. And then after that, when I was in IBM, I had to do the same thing. I joined the workforce analytics team. We were building an internal job recommendation engine. I had to understand how people transition between roles, and data and technology was the way to help me do that. So yeah, that's how it started. So
awesome.
I would say that right now I like looking at data and technology, but most of the time it's to serve a purpose of understanding people and helping people.
I really like that. And something not a lot of people know is my first major in college was psychology, and I had to take a research methods and statistics course. And that was my first statistics course too. And I was like, oh, I don't like this. I hate this. And I'm going to try something else. And then it comes full circle. Like all of the free time reading I do is on psychology, how our thoughts shape our behaviors and those types of things, which I think is really funny, where it started with it, I got disillusioned by it, and then I came back in some weird way to it. Did you find anything interesting about how, different people understand or rise or fall associated with competition? Was there a conclusion to that research?
There was. So actually, there's two. I found that there are two kinds of orientation. There's ego orientation and there's mastery orientation. So people who are mastery oriented is like, I'm going to set a standard for myself. I'm going to do a certain thing at a certain level of standard. Maybe I'm going to write some code, build this app in maybe 10 days. And that's their standard. If they hit it, they'll be super happy. And if they don't, they don't. And then there's other people who are ego oriented, who are like, hey, I'm going to build this app. Oh, my target was 10 days. I built it in 8 days. I'm supposed to be happy, but I see people around me, they built this in 5 days and they're sad, right? Because for them, the standard is the people around them. So what I found was that, so I could measure mastery orientation and ego orientation. And what I found was that people who are ego oriented, they perform well in competition settings, right? So how I did this was I measured this beforehand, and then I told them that there were two kinds of groups of people. I told them, hey, you're in a competition with other people, or hey, here's the standard, and if you achieve it, I'm going to give you some money. Or if you win the competition, versus if you win the competition, I'm going to give you some money. And I found that it maps very clearly. People who are ego oriented do better in a competition. People who are mastery oriented do better under the mastery condition. And if I mix it up, they just do average. So that's one thing interesting that I found for my psychology thesis.
Interesting. So I think it really can those things be situational. For example, in sports, I was always very like ego oriented, but in content creation, YouTube, and these types of things, I guess they're not competitive by any means, really. But they're I have friends who I want to see grow, but I also want to there's friendly competition with. But I'm more focused on my own personal growth and measuring benchmarks against myself. Can I have a different I guess orientation based on the field, or is that something that pervades everything?
You can, and actually that hits the nail on the head. So what I was trying to propose in that experiment was that, hey, different people respond differently to different contexts, but the context is just the context. You can shift the context. Even if you're in a competition, you can set standards for yourself to align it closer with your mastery orientation. And even if it's something that it's just yourself, you can introduce the ego orientation. You can introduce competition. And so I don't have an answer if the context would be ego oriented or master oriented, but I think that individuals, they can change the context to suit whatever drives them better, right? So for example, if I don't know, if I'm on Twitter, I'm tweeting stuff, and I don't know, I get some likes and he gets more likes and I get upset. I just try to take the competition out of it, right? Like what you mentioned for YouTube creation.
And so I'm interested. Let's move a little bit more into how you landed your first data science role or analytics role. Was there any thought associated with your personal orientation related to that role? Were you pursuing master orientation or ego orientation associated with that? And
No, I wish I had a nice story about that, but no, it wasn't. So I think before my first role, I was an investment analyst, right? So I went in, I was thinking, I could, create more jobs. I was an investment analyst for the government. I thought I could, create more jobs for the government of Singapore, figure out where to invest. But I realized that it was actually a very boring role. At least for me, I was doing a lot of investment negotiations. And I was looking at my buddies who were working more on the trade side of things, and they were always looking at numbers and Excel sheets and everything. That was all really exciting to me, right? I could easily quantify it. So then I just started looking out. I applied at a couple of roles, and I got very lucky. Back then, my first role was with IBM as a data analyst. So they had a program to hire about 20 people from industry as data analysts and consultants, right? So I practiced some at SQL, practiced some stats, practiced some R, and I went to an interview and I got it. So that was how I landed my first role. So why do I say I was super lucky? Because on the first day that I joined, out of 20 people there, 10 of them had PhDs. And the other 10, so 10 of them had PhDs, right? So half of them were PhDs, and all of them had a technical degree, which is, either computer science or information systems or bioinformatics, etc. There's only two people that didn't have technical degree. One was a lady with an economics background, and the other was me, psychology. So I think maybe this was some kind of diversity thing where, they wanted to get someone with a diverse background, and that's how I got in. Yeah.
that's awesome. How did you find out about that program that they had? What type of research were you doing associated with finding opportunities like that?
I I think I just Google online, like how to get a data analyst job. I think this was in 2013, and I think the big data wave was just hitting back then, and everyone was trying to hire for a data analyst or someone to work on big data. So I just got lucky, and there were a couple of companies who also had such programs. Some of the marketing analytics companies, some of the advertising companies. So I just tried my luck.
Interesting. Well, I think that there's a lot of value in this like cohort approach. A lot of companies have like training programs, or they have leadership development programs that I don't think as many people know about. I mean, there's quite a few. There's one at Capital One when I was looking at a grad school. So you do 6 months rotations in different fields. There was one out of, I think Kraft has one. A lot of these large companies,
Yep.
and they are, those are focused on people who are fresh out of college or that don't have as much experience, because their thought is if we can train them, we'll have, they'll be able to have the exact skills that we need on the job. So rather than, I think a lot of people are focused on, let's go into this analyst program, but if you land a job in a rotational program or a training program, it's like a double benefit. You get them to teach you as well as having an actual job, at that early stage in your career. So
I
yeah.
agree, and that was why I actually went to the government in the first place, because you had a lot of freedom to rotate and get posted overseas at the start. So that, and I know a lot of friends who went to join the Shell Management Associate Program, the PNG or the Unilever Management Associate Program. So it's a big thing as well in where I'm from in Singapore.
Yeah. Well, and the nice thing about those programs is you have a lot of flexibility. So you'll probably get a work in at least one rotation if you ask for it, associated with analytics of some sort. And you're already in the company, and there's already some like gray area about what you're going to be doing. So if you ask to do more of one thing, they're probably going to be inclined to help have you work on that more. I know I actually, well, a couple of my friends did the one at GE, and they essentially did one rotation in data analytics. And they said, "Hey, I like doing this. I want to do more of it." And they just did all their rotations there. And so
Wow,
it's like, well,
nice.
it never hurts if you don't ask. And so I'd love to hear how your career has progressed since you started working at IBM. Obviously, if I recall correctly, you were working in Singapore and now you're working in the US. Love to hear how that progression went from changing companies, changing geographic locations as well.
So maybe I can share about how I left IBM.
Yeah, great.
I guess, yeah. So my role after IBM, my next role after IBM, I was at an e-commerce startup. It's called Lazada. So back then I joined as the third data scientist on the team. So it was a fairly unusual experience, and a lot of people ask. I speak to a lot of people, a lot of mentees, and they ask, should I be doing Kaggle? Um, I just share this example of them. So what I did back then was I did a Kaggle competition on product classification with a buddy of mine, and we did pretty well. So we decided to share about our approach at a meetup. So it turns out that this e-commerce company, Lazada, they had this same problem, which is product classification, and they knew about our meetup. I think someone attended at our meetup, and so they invited me in for lunch. And I went in for lunch. I explained to them how I did it for a Kaggle competition. They asked, how would you do it for us? Here's the data fields that you have. You have to do it across 6 different countries. Here's the infra that you would have. So I sort of designed something with them, and we had lunch. And eventually after that, that's how they offered me a job. And they said, we like come in and solve this problem for us, and after you solve this problem, you can solve other problems. At a point in time, I think I was sharing this with my parents, with the people around me, and they're like, are you sure that's a wise thing to do, to leave IBM to join an unknown startup? Back then, Lazada was an unknown startup. So, but I thought, hey, I like the people there. I like the boss. I like some of my colleagues. I actually know some of my teammates before actually joining the team. So I thought, hey, why not? So I'm young, so I took a pay cut to join them. Lazada was a great ride. After 3 years, and that was the point in time where Alibaba acquired us. Right. So after Alibaba acquired us, I thought, hey, I got some skills. I want to try to change to another role where I can help people. So that was the point I joined a health tech startup. But I was in the health tech startup for a bit, but unfortunately, the financial incentives weren't aligned. What I mean by that is that I think health tech has a lot to do, can do a lot of good, but the financial incentives aren't aligned with the industry. And maybe if you're interested, I can talk a bit more about that, but the financial incentives weren't aligned. So I was looking for my next adventure. And at a point in time, my wife and I were thinking, Singapore's a really comfortable place, but we like traveling. Should we get out of Singapore for a bit? So we were looking at, of course, She works in a company that is headquartered in San Francisco. So I tried looking at San Francisco. Also a couple of places like Berlin, Shanghai, Hangzhou. And eventually we landed on Seattle. I think it so happened that I got a couple of offers from Seattle. So I got a chance to choose. And that's where I am now in Amazon, working on recommendation systems for books.
That's awesome. Well, I think that just that progression is pretty fascinating, how you're able to go and chase your interest, and also, you might have taken a pay cut, but the problems are more interesting, the culture associated with the work is more interesting. And I also think that startups in general, the upside is a lot higher. Yes, there's more risk, but you get to work, you have more hands-on on the individual problems, and you also have a higher ability to see the results of your work. Obviously you're working at a very large company now. IBM is a very large company, but you also worked in 2 different startups. What were the main differences that you saw there? What was the experience differences? And I don't think anyone can say that one is better than the other, but what did you really take away from the 2, I guess, very different ways of life?
So, well, I think so. I used to be in IBM, right, which is a huge company. And then I moved to a startup / scale up. And then after I moved to another 10-man startup. I would say that, firstly, if you're considering a startup or a big company, I think if you're a data scientist, the first question that you got to make sure is, does the team have any data to work with in the first place? So I've had friends, they joined a startup, they thought that, hey, I'm going to have data, I'm going to build something cool. And they realized for the first 1.5 years, they're actually spending time collecting the data. You want to make sure that you don't make, if you're interested in that, yeah, do that. But most people I know aren't. So firstly, all these companies had data, but the amount of data they had was different. So when I joined the startup, or when it was early stages in Lazada, we had data to the extent that I could use all of the data, right? I could use all the data to train a machine learning model. But when you're in a company like IBM or Amazon, that's not possible, right? Yeah, you have to use a sample of the data. If not, your model will probably never converge, or you have to use a lot of machines, and that's probably unnecessarily expensive. So that's one thing. And when I was in Lazada, we would want to say, hey, I want to track this data. I want to track the XY position on the screen where the customer is clicking. Or, such data is not available. Okay, you have to build a tracker for it yourself, and then you build a tracker and it starts collecting the data. But to a large extent, we sort of know what URLs people are on, and how we can collect that. And then the other thing about startup, which is a pro and a con, is that most startups, you can start with an empty slate. So what that means is that, hey, you can come in and, if you've been keeping up the technology and the research, you would have a lot of exciting ideas in your head. Hey, we should probably be using PyTorch or JAX or Fast API, a lot of new stuff, or Spark or Flink, and you probably have more liberty to choose what kind of tech stack you want. Provided you have to be able to quantify the value of it. So at startups, you can do that. And you're not locked into any cloud provider or any legacy infra. But a big tech company, you can't, right? Because there's all this infra and all this legacy that's in there. And, hey, we use Java. Our scientists, our engineers use Java. You got to use this. Or we use, but can we use Scala? Well, we can't do Scala. We have to use Java. So it's all that. But the magic about being in a big company is that all the infra is there. And it's really amazing. So let me share with you this example. I think my first week in Amazon, I was able to get access to user reading behavior on Kindle, right? Because you're on Kindle, we actually track, we actually can see, how many pages you read. I could track user reading behavior to understand how much of a book users completed. I could plot some graphs on that using a Spark cluster. And I could do that all within the first week. And setting up the Spark cluster was self-service, getting access to the data was self-service, and plotting and installing your own libraries was all self-service. And you can do that within a week. Contrast that to my experience when I was in Lazada, figure out, how to get access credentials to the Spark cluster. I had to SSH, pass someone my SSH key, and then the engineers had to edit for me, and I had to get access to the tables and all that. When it was all very scrappy, was all not quite ready yet. So I would say that there's pros and cons in both startup and big tech co. And I guess given where you are, I mean, just try to enjoy the best of what you have, and try and look on the bright side.
Yeah, I mean, that was really well put. I that's not something that initially comes to my head, is the cleanliness of the stack and the ability to clearly access things, and the volume of data too is really interesting. I mean, something that I'm interested in. You mentioned that your experience landing the other position through Kaggle and through meetups. I think there's so much value in showing your work publicly. Did that play at all into your experience landing a role in the US, or what was that process like, landing a job from Singapore to the US more specifically?
Well, I don't know. Do you have any friends who have landed jobs from not in the US to US?
Some like from Canada to US, but most of them went the route of they did a master's degree in the US and then they made that transition or something along that sort.
Well, I'm going to share very openly with your audience and you, and I hope this doesn't scare people. But that journey was not easy. Was pretty difficult. So and so maybe to give some context, at a point in time, I probably had 5-6 years experience as a data scientist in Singapore. I had led teams. I was leading teams in Lazada as well as the health tech startup I was in. But one thing that's really difficult getting a job in the US is the H-1B visa, right? It's a lottery component, and most employers weren't ready for that. But specific for me, I'm a Singaporean, so I have this visa called H1B1. So H1B1, it has a yearly quota of I think about 5,400, and it's never filled up. Last year the quota, in the year when I applied, the quota that was used was like 700. So there's no quota, you can get it any point in time. So a big part of my strategy of landing a role in the US was education. I had to educate the recruiters about visas. My cover letter actually, I initially had a very nice cover letter and everything, and actually I have this line in my resume at the top, in my profile summary, as he says, essentially the gist is, I'm a Singaporean and eligible for H1B1, no lottery, low cost, finishes processing in two months or something. So that's what I had to do. And I was surprised how many employers didn't know about it. I think Amazon was the only employer that actually knew about a H1B1, whereby where you can select the visa type, and then they did it. So eventually I did that. And of course, every time I explained that to a recruiter, they say, okay, let me check back with legal. And they would check with legal, and legal say, yeah, we can do that. H1B1, we haven't done that before, but we did some lookup. Yeah, it is as easy as he claims. And then after I went through the interviews, and I did well for the interviews. So the interviews were not the blocker, but it was this process of explaining to people about a visa. So I also have some friends who are not in the US, and they're like, hey, Eugene, how do you get to the US, to work there? So, how do you join, all the talent here to learn from them? I would say that's not easy, actually. The H1B visa process is quite difficult. And the H1B, if it's a lottery based, so it's not so straightforward. But if you're from Singapore, or if you're from Chile, which are the two countries that have access to a separate quota, then you might have an easier time. I don't know how much of this is politically correct to put on the YouTube video, but yeah, but it's an insider's view, I guess.
No, that's honestly really, really useful information. So to me, regardless of if you're eligible for H1B1, the approach you took of, hey, this is the biggest bottleneck that I'm going to have landing a job in the US. I'm going to put it at the top of my resume. I'm going to spread awareness about it. I like the way you said, hey, I had to educate the recruiters. I had to educate the companies on this. Like, even if you don't have like figuring out what the biggest problem is in the process and focusing on that and getting past that hurdle. It's that like 80-20 principle. Like that is probably the biggest thing that was detracting from your prospects. And once you got past that, it was significantly easier. You said the actual interview process wasn't that difficult for you. So I think that taking that approach to anything is important. It's like, well, there are different avenues to get in. Obviously, we talked about, you don't have to work in the US. You can work in Europe. You can work in some of these other countries if that's what you like. And the visa process is very different there and a lot more lenient. I think Germany, from what I understand, is pretty good to work in if you're coming from anywhere in East Asia or anything along those lines. So, as you'd mentioned, the US isn't your only option, and it can be a really difficult option. But if we're taking that same approach you were looking at, it's like, well, let's find countries that are the easiest for me to work in that are not the country that I'm coming from. And, maybe the US is one if you're from Singapore or Chile, but if you're coming from India, if you're coming from Sri Lanka, if you're coming from a lot of different countries, like,
Yep.
The quality of life in London or the quality of life in most European countries is essentially the same as it is in the US, and the technology advancement and the level of learning is also very high. So I really liked that you were so honest with me there, because that's something I didn't know anything about before this conversation.
Yeah, I didn't know that as well. I had to reach out to a couple of friends. I asked them how you did it, and they said, the main bottleneck is educating a recruiter. So, I spoke to recruiters every time they ask about it. It's like, oh, are you eligible for visa? I am. I need a visa, but I need a Singaporean visa, which is, and then, I'll be I was essentially a Singapore government spokesperson. We have this amazing visa program. You could do this, you could do that, everything. And I know some friends who also, went to other places like Canada. Canada's a lot easier to get a PR. It's a 1-year process. Or, they go to work in London or in China, which is also a bit more liberal in terms of foreign talent.
Awesome. And so something outside of the job market that I know that you do is you produce a reasonable amount of blog content. And I'll link some of your articles below. I've really enjoyed reading them. How did you first get interested in doing that? What was the onus behind creating that information for other people to read?
Well, I think it started, how it started is actually pretty silly. So I think back in 5 years ago, I was interviewing, what I like to do is I like to interview people who are 2 or 3 steps ahead of me. And my career at that point in time, I was interviewing, senior data scientists or lead data scientists. I asked them, hey, of the people around you, of the data scientists around you, who are the most effective? What do they do? And it essentially boils down to this question. What are the skill sets needed to be an effective data scientist? So I probe them, is it big data, figuring out how to harness the power of big data, or, figuring out machine learning and deep learning, research, or, is it speaking well with the business? And all of them gave me a very surprising answer. The surprising answer they gave me was that, Eugene, all that's important, but you're neglecting one main thing, which is communication. I said, what is communication? They said communication means the ability to write well. You write something and people can understand it, or you say something and people can understand it. So I was really surprised. I was like, how can you say something or write something and people don't understand? So you'll be very surprised. So they share they have data scientists, whereby they go to a meeting with the business folks, and after the business folks have no idea what the data scientist is talking about, and that's where the project gets stuck. Right? They write a proposal. People read it, they don't understand it, but they don't dare to say that they don't understand it, and they just that's how it gets stuck. So I was like, okay, so if that's the main thing, and so many of them said the same thing, I thought they were just pulling my leg, or I thought this is just some kind of weird bug in my interview process. But I decided to try it, and that was why I gave that meetup to present about my Kaggle competition that landed me a job in Lazada. And at that time, I was really focused on trying to do this. So that was also the point in time where I started to write on my blog in 2016. At that point in time, I would write once a month. And the stuff that I write was really basic. I would just write my reviews of the different courses I took. Certain things I would read about, like some people ask me things like, hey, what does a data scientist really do? Or how can I get into data science? or hey, how does your team apply agile and Scrum in data science? What were your learnings? I would write about this, just to answer these questions. That was how it happened. It happened because people tell me that the most important skill for data scientists is to write. So I started doing that. And it has brought me a lot of benefits, right? I think in my role in Lazada, I think the reason I asked my boss and my skip why promote me? Why me? He said that when the business talks to you, they actually understand you. And so your role here is to teach everyone else that thing. You stop doing hands-on work and you just teach them that thing, and you get them to shadow you when they talk to the business and just teach them that thing, because that's the one thing that will multiply their effectiveness, right? So that's what I did. And now I've been writing a lot more. I guess because somewhere in the middle, I took a master's in computer science part-time. that took like 30, 40 hours a week. So once I was done with that, all of a sudden I had a huge gap in my schedule. I was like, holy crap, I got so much time. What do I do with it? So I decided to continue writing. Decided to write more, but now at a cadence of once a week. And I try to answer questions. I try to share my knowledge. So that's why I write. I guess because the mentors I spoke to asked me to do that.
Yeah, well, it's a data problem, which I think is really fascinating. I mean, you went out, you did case studies, and something that a lot of people don't realize is that in the business environment, if we're thinking about our day-to-day work, I would argue the majority of our communication is written, whether it's
Yep.
on Slack, whether it's via email, whether it's via a memo or a report or whatever that might be. And having strong written skills can be invaluable in the workplace. And I mean, having speaking skills is nice. It can be useful, but if I'm thinking about how I communicate with other data scientists in the work domain, it's usually through email or Slack. And so if you can convey that, hey, I have this strong written communication, and you can do that through a cover letter, you can do that through your blog, but more people will read your blog than a cover letter, to be completely
That's
realistic,
true.
right?
Yeah.
And so I think that it's really important to realize that it's not just isolated to audio communication. I mean, I've obviously maximized on audio and verbal communication with the videos, and that's one of the reasons why I created the videos as well. Is I remember very distinctly I did an interview, and it was a prompt on the screen. It asked a question, and I had to speak to this blank screen and answer. And I got to watch the video over again. I didn't get any retries, but they let you watch it back. And I've never seen myself look so insecure and stumble over my words, and my expression the whole time was just, it was completely unexpressive. There was nothing going on. And I realized that, hey, this is something, if this is going to be any part of interviewing or any part of my life in the future, I need to figure this stuff out. Like, I need to do better on that front. And so that's where I've obviously, I write the script for every single one of my videos as well. So hopefully I'm flexing both muscles, but I mean, it is unbelievably important. And I can't imagine, we're both on the front where so many good things have happened because of the things that we've just put out there, whether it's a job, whether it's us even being able to meet, right? I think that
exactly.
we were referred through a friend who had written, who'd read some of your work and said, this would be a great guy to talk to. So you never know what could happen associated with what you put out into the world.
I fully agree. And maybe I can just share a little bit. I think right now, I've realized that as I write, okay, how do I put this? Writing is the main way that I make friends nowadays, right? I would write certain content and people would just email me, hey, that thing that you wrote was really interesting. Can we get a chat? And I'll be, I'm always happy to have a chat. And this is the reason why I write, right? I write to say, I'm interested in this. This is my thinking about it. Do you have any feedback? Do you disagree on anything? Can it be improved? And sometimes people actually reach out. Before this, I was doing a lot of this at meetups, right? I would share a lot at meetups, and that's how. But now with COVID and the lockdown, it's very difficult. So the main way for me to do this is through writing, and through Twitter, through sharing it on Twitter and LinkedIn, and I get a lot of feedback, and that's how I make a lot of new friends. People who've thought a lot about this, who have this very interesting very specific interests as well, and they reach out to me, and that's a key benefit that I really enjoy right now.
That's something I want to echo 100%. I've made more friends, I hate to say during COVID, that had very similar interests to me
Yep.
than I've made in my entire life. And it's fascinating because the internet or putting your stuff online, it makes it so much easier for like-minded people to find you and to connect
Yep.
with you and do these types of things. If I go, let's just say a random bar, right? And I go to meet people and have some drinks, do whatever. I don't really drink anymore, but if I were hypothetically to do that, the odds that I would meet another data scientist, even very low, let alone
Yep.
a data scientist that's also interested in sports or interested
Yep.
in content creation, whatever that might be. But if I put a video on the internet, the law of large numbers suggests that more people will find me through that information or through that content, and we'll kind of be drawn together because of those our common interests. So it's a very interesting social experiment as well, is that if you put things out into the world that you're interested in, you're also going to find other people that you're interested in or are interested in the same things, and those turn into businesses, those turn into just like fun times or something a lot more, which is incredible in my mind.
Yeah, and when it resonates well enough, the people actually reach out. So so far I've had collaborations, cross posting with a friend of mine, Susan. I mean, she writes a lot. She's a data scientist as well, but she writes a lot about career, and I think a lot about that as well. So we've been cross posting about that. A couple of companies have reached out to me, just to consult on this things like that, and that's amazing, right? Because a lot of the stuff I write. A lot of stuff I write about, feature stores and real-time recommendations, and the reason why about search queries. The reason why I write it, the viewers will now know I said these are things that I study, and the post that I write is actually just a summary note of what I've studied. But the intent of this is to teach small, medium enterprises, this is how I studied it, and this is the easiest way for you to get started. So for example, when I wrote about feature stores, I wrote about you don't really need a feature store, you just need a Redis and just dump it in or just use Feast. And when I wrote about real-time recommendations, there's a very small MVP at the bottom that you can probably do in 2 weeks. And the same for search queries, right? So, and when I wrote this and people, and my target audience, these SMEs, these small medium enterprises read it, they say, hey, we are thinking of implementing this. Can we have half an hour to an hour of our time? And that's perfect, right? That's the main reason why I write this. And they share with me their plan, they share with me the design, and say, okay, I think it's perfect idea, perfect design, and they go ahead and implement it, and then I check in with them every now and then. So that allows me to help people at scale, right? To help these enterprises help their customers at scale, and that is really rewarding for me, at least.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. There's so many parallels. Is that if you put something out there like that, you can help so many more people than necessarily just having these one-on-one meetings all the time,
Yeah.
right? And to me, I get asked the same questions very routinely, and it makes so much more sense for me to make a video out of it and to be able to,
Yes.
I'm going to tell them the exact same thing either way. And in a video, I can go into more detail than I would in an individual conversation because of the time constraint. I can spend an hour hashing out a topic and really making a good 15-minute, like organized recommendation that can help a lot of people, rather than someone asking me like, how do I become a data scientist? I'll probably tell them the three same things in half the time without half the detail, because the question does get a little old at a certain time. So
And it scales infinitely. You just give
yeah.
them an URL. I wrote about this, or I did a video about this, and that's perfect. And that's how you scale yourself.
Yeah. And so let's hone in on one of the articles you wrote. I really like the one you wrote about end-to-end data science. And I'd like to get a better understanding of how you envision end-to-end data science and what that means for people who want to become data scientists, or for small, medium enterprises, or for even a big company like Amazon.
Yeah, maybe I can share a bit of context about why I wrote that article. So I think uh, In my chats with my data science peers, there's a common anti-pattern that I see, which is that there's this workflow. It's a very cliche workflow that data scientists write something hacky in R, throws it over to the data engineer who has to re-implement everything in Java or Python or C. It's cliche, but it happens. It happens so much that it is a huge bottleneck to getting stuff into production. So I had this experience. So in the startup I had this experience where there was this data scientist. He wrote some code for a machine learning model. It was really, really awful. I mean, it was full of for loops. There was no seed, a lot of bugs. And after you run this, you have to run that, run this. So it's not fully automated. And when he handed that over to the engineering team has so much difficulty trying to re-implement it. They had to check in with him every now and then. It was not reproducible. So it's really difficult for them to do that. And I was like, oh my God, this cannot be the way to work. If we do this, data scientists we are going to find ourselves out of a job, in the sense that we're going to find so much difficulty getting things into production. And at a point in time, there was also this thing I was seeing where companies were slicing up the data science process into many, many small roles. There's a data engineer, there's a data scientist, there's a machine learning engineer, there's DevOps. And at a point in time, trying to get anything done means that you have to get all these different people into a meeting room, and it slows things down, and you need the PM and everything. So I think that end-to-end data science is important because it gives the data scientists more visibility and they can iterate faster. But I just want to qualify in the sense and say that I don't think that that's the only way to work. A lot of people have read that post and have commented, hey, is this the only way to work? Does it mean that every data scientist has to be full stack? No, that I deliberately not use the word full stack because I think it has nothing to do with technology at all. I think it has everything to do with from the problem to the result. So that's why I think end-to-end data science works. And I cited two examples where Netflix does this for their software engineers, where they build and maintain their own stuff, as well as Stitch Fix, where their data scientists take control of the entire problem.
That's awesome. And I think, something that even if you are breaking the data science team up into chunks, engineer, data scientist, ML engineer, whatever it is, if every one of those people in that process has an understanding of what's going on at the next step or what they're designing for, I mean, the concept still holds, right? Is that you're going to be able to better communicate with every other person if you have an understanding of the whole process. And, if you're applying for a data science role, if you have an understanding of the whole process, you could very easily fit into any of those intermediary roles to land a job if you understand the full pipeline.
Yeah, and I fully agree. It doesn't mean that one person has to be completely end-to-end, but when you create teams around building products, that team should be able to take care of the end-to-end. You could have a data engineer paired with the data scientist and a machine learning engineer, but they should have this concept of complete ownership, right? They have to go from the problem and the data to a solution, and they have to take responsibility of it. And you can't have anything like saying that you can't have a data scientist, hey, I handed them my code, they're supposed to productionize it properly, or you can't have someone, hey, the code that he handed me was not working in the first place. That's not what we want. We want to have someone who takes ownership of delivering everything end to end, who gets feedback from users, who is able to iterate fast, who's able to take all the learnings they have fast. So that's why I think that's how I think end-to-end data science helps, at least in my experience, what I've seen.
Yeah, and I'm interested how, for example, microservices would fit into that. So, in my mind, you can work across, across those levels of engineering, model building, and production, if at each of those stages there's an API endpoint that you're hitting, right?
Yep.
And so this is a good RESTful API. We know we're going to send something for the data and we're going to get something back, the actual data that we need into the model. And then the next part is we're going to send data from the front end into the model, and we know we're going to get a reliable response there. I mean, how does isolating or productizing each part of the process fit into that? Is that a good idea? Is that a bad idea? What are your feelings on that?
I think that's a great idea. Nonetheless, I haven't tried it with microservices, but I think that for each of the intermediate stages, the data store is very useful. The data store is very useful. I think that, for example, let's say a data engineer, right? He wants to pass some data to the data scientist. The intermediate point is the data store. So that's their intermediate interface where they have to make sure that the data is right, it fits the format, it fits the schema, etc. And then when the data scientist wants to put something into production, what's the intermediate data store with the machine learning engineer? I think I think that the perfect intermediate artifact is a Docker container, where the data scientist takes responsibility of building the model and making sure that it's running correctly, writing the interface class, either using Fast API or Flask or whatever. And they just have to tell the machine learning engineer, okay, you start this Docker container, you run this Docker container, and you hit it with this schema, you're gonna get a result. And the machine learning engineer, he can verify for himself, he can write a test case and it works, and he can just put it into production. So I think having the right interfaces is essential for end-to-end data science.
Yeah, and I think that's a little page out of the book of just good software engineering practice is the basics of how an API works is you send it and you get a response, and you shouldn't have to necessarily know how everything works under the hood. That's abstracted away. It's just like this is
Yep.
reliable, and that's how a model in theory should work. Doesn't always
Yep.
work that way, but yeah.
Yeah, so I agree. I think that's how I would split up the process, if I had to.
Perfect. So honestly, those are the main questions that I had for you. I think we covered a lot of ground, and I've really enjoyed this conversation. Is there anything that you want to end with? Something that you have a particular stance on? Any parting words of advice? Any causes you care about? Anything along those lines are fair game.
Well, I don't have anything specific, but I think one thing that really touched uh, that really came out during this conversation is that Ken has gained a lot by just sharing his work out there on YouTube, and I think I've gained a lot by sharing my work out there via writing. So I guess the only request I would have is I would like for people to do more of that, to do more of the sharing or writing. Sometimes I tell some of my mentees, you should figure out how to start writing, or do a video vlog, or just tweet or LinkedIn, whatever you're thinking about, and try to find like-minded people. And the response that I get is that sometimes they say that, hey, I don't know what to tweet about, I don't know what to write about, or who's going to listen to it. And my response, I think it's going to be kind of sad, is that, hey, for your first 10 or 20 blog posts or something, no one's going to read it, but you are going to benefit yourself by just writing and just clarifying your thoughts. And then after they ask, what should I write about? Again, for the first 10 or 20 posts, you're not going to figure out what you want to write about. After you've written a lot, and then you start to see the patterns in your content, and that's what you should focus on eventually. So I guess the takeaway I have is, maybe take a leaf from what Ken has done, or maybe from what I'm doing, and just try to create more content, do your projects, put it out there, write some documentation, and share it with the world, and find like-minded people. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, honestly, this is a shameless plug, but it's perfect for what you were just talking about, is the 66 days of data initiative that I've been doing. And so the idea
Yep.
there is you learn something and you tweet about it every day for
Yep.
66 days, you share your projects. And in that scenario, you will have more than you'll have plenty of people who are actually reading what you're writing, because there's a community associated with that. There's a hashtag. If people tag me, I read all of the posts. And you also get out of the area of what should I write about. Each day you're writing about what you're working on. And so that's, in my mind, a really great way to build that habit of first sharing, but also, getting into the habit of actually learning data science and doing more and putting that stuff out there. So shameless plug, but
No, I think that's a great plug. And I just want to add that, hey, even if you tweet that and no one reads it or no one reacts to it, that's fine. because the process of you tweeting that, you have learned so much by trying to do that, right? So think about it as a single player game. When you're creating content, you're gaining so much for yourself. And if you get lucky and it becomes a multiplayer game where someone else sees your tweet and they reach out to you and you make friends, that's a bonus, right? But
Yeah.
just start putting yourself out there.
I really like the single player multiplayer game analogy. And I guess one additional thing is if you're playing the single player game, you can still look back at all the body of work you've made and see how far you've come. And that's incredibly motivational. Whenever I get stuck, I'm like, oh, this is hard, or whatever. I say, Ken, you made 100 some odd videos. You can make another one, and then everything will be fine, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming in, Eugene. I really enjoyed this, and I think everyone's going to learn quite a bit from our conversation here.
Likewise, and thank you for having me, Ken.